I billed. That was, an hourly billing, and have to keep it. And I usually billed somewhere between 26 and 2,800 hours. But Ehrlich billed more hours than me, but he was the only person in the firm at that time there was, and they were charging $30 an hour for my time in 1976. But Ehrlich was an international, or certainly nationally known lawyer, and they were only charging $75 an hour for his time, which is kind of amazing, but just goes to show how, times have changed, inflation has changed, money has changed. Anyway, I got to try an awful lot of jury trials with him. As mentioned just a second ago, Hans Tanzler was one of my father's absolute best friends, and he was mayor, and he decided to run for governor and ended up coming in third. My father at the time was on an appellate court, the First District Court of Appeal, and Tanzler went to my father and asked if he would be interested in stepping off the bench and starting a law firm. And I don't know how, Dad was making $37,000 a year at the time, and Dad apparently told Tanzler, this is what he told me, Tanzler, that if I was willing to leave Matthews Osborne and start the firm with him, that he would do it, because he'd just like to practice with his son. Otherwise, no. And so I did that, and I'll never forget the day we started, I signed a line of credit with these other guys, and for $90,000. And I thought, gosh, dog. Now you got to remember, when I bought my first house, I paid $37,500. So $90,000. And about less than 6 weeks later, we signed another note for $90,000. I said, I'm going to go bankrupt. And but that was this was before advertising and all this, and we started getting more and more work, and we were able to pay that back, and we were fortunate to be successful. I enjoyed practicing law, and I got most of my work from lawyer referrals, because it's mostly products liability. And I started traveling a lot, because you always have to have experts. You're taking depositions all over the United States. There you go. Y'all don't mind if I just stop and eat, right?
Yeah. Take a break.
So I started traveling, and to me, traveling was lonely. So alone, and you have some lawyers that same lawyers are doing a lot of the defense work anyway. Some of them we'd always go out to dinner together, and it was very nice. The other lawyers, you couldn't hardly talk to them. So I decided to start writing a book, and I ended up not knowing where I was going with it, but just writing. And then I was practicing law. I was working a ridiculous number of hours. I started having, heart palpitations quite a bit, and I decided, and I was working 60, 70 hours a week, like a lot of lawyers do, and the pressure was always on. You had to make payroll, and so I decided maybe a good way to change what I was doing was to try to become a judge, and I became a judge. I had one more of those heart things after I became a judge. Knock on wood, I haven't had any since, but the stress of being a lawyer lawyering is stressful, I think, and being a judge is a good gig. Especially if you are willing to just make decisions. And any of you who are ever in front of me will know that at the end of every hearing, I ruled, with the exception of about a half a dozen times in 20 years. I mean, I ruled right then, and for those who do or don't know, I would always tell the lawyers to write the order, but I would dictate the order while we're still in the chambers, so that they could, and if they had I always encourage court reporters, because then I could dictate it, but otherwise I'd dictate to the lawyers. And that way I didn't have a bunch on my plate later on, and I just didn't do what they call taking under advisement. I found that other judges, when I was practicing law, they take it under advisement and they forget about it, and so and I just didn't want to do it that way. Judge Goodfriend did it the way I did it, and I really thought he was a terrific judge. So that was kind of the history of that sort of thing. You were asking what do you do for fun, and I love my family, and that's fun. But I've been hunting since I was in diapers, and my father took me squirrel hunting when I was in diapers, and I didn't realize it at the time, but and we I know people have their own opinions about, but squirrel's about the best meat you'll ever eat. It really is. I still squirrel hunt, and but Dad would say that squirrel got caught in the tree, so I would shake the limb. And he'd hold me up to do that, and the squirrel would fall down. Well, I didn't realize that he had already shot the squirrel, put it on the limb so that we could have that kind of father-son type of situation. I remember, and we hunted squirrels back in those days with a shotgun, and as I got older and I got to do it, Dad and I would go out and we'd go in different directions. And so one time I'm out, and we always meet up in 20 minutes or so, and Dad said, "I heard you shoot. Did you get one?" And I said, "Oh no, I said no. A crow flew over and I shot the crow." He said, "Well, okay, do you have it?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, let's go find it." So he told me to pluck it, and he told me my mother would cook it, and that was the last crow I ever shot. But it was a good point, because we don't shoot things just to shoot things. That's not sport. And and my wife and I continued that. We eat mostly game meat every day. Every week she either makes a sloppy joe out of venison or a meatloaf, and because we snack on it all week long. And anyway, that's most of our food is that way, and it is not fatty. It doesn't matter if it's a pheasant or a turkey or a duck or anything else. You don't have all the fat, or deer. Anyway, that's I tell you all that because if you happen to read my book, you're going to find out that this hero in my book likes to hunt. And an important part of the book has to do with some of a hunting adventure. But it is more, what it really is a courtroom thriller. I mean, I think that I've got great feedback, and so I feel very fortunate about it. What happened, and I told you I started this when I was practicing law. When I became a judge, I put a bunch of stuff in my office, and when I was packing up to leave, I found a 3-ring binder with the book in it, and so I decided, I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and I had to change an awful lot of things. For example, we no longer have Oldsmobiles. We now everybody has cell phones. There's an awful lot of stuff like that. But also a lot of I edited it thoroughly. But the original copyright from the 3-ring binder, back then they told me this is the way to do it, but I sent it with a return address envelope to where in Washington D.C. They send it back. You don't ever open that envelope because now it's copyrighted. So the original copyright was about 1995 or 96, but this is the first printing, and it is in 2022. So when I've self-printed published this, and when I did, I wanted to make it as professional as possibly could. You'll find that the inside pages look professional, including all the copyright information and first printing information. I had it, I used a company called Palmetto Press. They are out of Charleston, South Carolina. If you're doing a book, you can look into it. It can cost you a whole lot of money or less money. You don't have to have it with dust jackets and all that, but I wanted to do it that way. And they also provide you, if you want, an editor, which I had edited, and believe it or not, my editor gave me good reviews. I found one thing, though: you need to give direction to the editors, because I've always felt competent on grammar, and my editor didn't necessarily agree that my semicolon shouldn't be a comma or my comma shouldn't be a semicolon, and that was a little bit of a problem. But mostly it was that was a good thing to do. And it's not very expensive. And then but he missed some things, like the dedication was supposed to be to trial lawyers, and it's spelled trail lawyers. And I'm sure there's some other things, but leave my commas and semicolons alone. But that's kind of why, that is why I did it. I believe that as a lawyer and as a judge, I was able to see that the various pressures that people go through as lawyers. I mean, there's a lot of pressure, and I think, did the pressure seem in the book?
It did.
Yeah.
It did.
And it is legally correct. This book, it's the only legally correct book I ever saw. I mean, you know, we all read the John Grishams and stuff like that, but you know, they take a lot of license, and I think that they say you can take a lot of license. I wanted to make certain that when people read it, what they heard in the courtroom, the way hearings were handled, the way depositions are handled, and all of that stuff is handled the way they truly are and legally correct. It was kind of fun. I decided, since I've done this, and not likely to do another one, a fiction, I said, well, I think I'll just have a pen name. I'll be like Mark Twain, you know. And so I used the pen name T. William, because my name is Tyrie William Boyer. That was a mistake. If you write it, don't use a pen name. And the reason is, you can get this on Amazon, but people look up Tyrie Boyer and they can't find it on Amazon. So unless they know that, unless I tell people it's T. William, and then you know, the name you can remember, it's Retribution, and isn't that what lawyers do? A lot of retribution, and I get these little checks from. Actually, it's direct deposits from Amazon for some that are selling that way. But it was fun doing it that way. The other thing is, you know, I could set any price I wanted, and I made it $21.20. And that's because one of my daughters was born on the 21st and one was born on the 20th. And so, you know, it's my opportunity, so it's good. I'm going to play with it. But I should have made it $29.95. but anyway, so if you do that, you don't want to get carried away necessarily on just having fun. That I would like, and I've just kind of recently decided, and this young lady has kind of pointed me in that direction a little bit. I'm going to see if I can find somebody who'd like to really publish it. I mean, other than self-publishing. And my feedback, fortunately, it has really been good, and except for my wife.
So when it gets made into a movie, who's going to play the attorney, and who's going to play the tall huntress? And you know, I'm describing people there, and it was.
Well, DiCaprio could be the lawyer, right? I don't even go to movies hardly. I remember Clark Gable and all those, Robert Redford, but I don't remember. I don't go to enough movies now to know who's popular. That's another thing though that's fun, and I don't know if you read the book, you're going to find names that you know or you've heard of.
So is Ken Baker the insurance guy? Ken Baker, because you mentioned Kenneth Baker. He's Cora's brother-in-law.
I'm trying to put. No, I mean that's.
No,
just,
okay.
But when I was getting ready to publish it, well, when I first started it, Richard Nichols was a good friend of mine. He was a lawyer, and he was a really good friend of mine. And he and I and Lance Day were having a cocktail somewhere, and in San Marco, and I was telling them I was writing this book, and both of them said they wanted to be in the book. So one of the first characters I named was Lance Nichols, and several of the judges in Jacksonville, their names are in it, but that's after they told me they would like to have their name in it. And anybody whose name I used, I gave them a book. And so the judge is Judge Howard Coker. I don't know if y'all know Howard, but he is and he wanted that. Howard and I actually go back to high school together. He's a year older than me. It's hard to believe. I don't know if you know Howard, but he's not very tall, but he was an excellent athlete and took our high school to the semifinals statewide back when I was a kid, and his mother would drive his brother and me to the games down in Gainesville with basketball. And anyway, so that was another fun thing to do. But if you decide to write, each time you create a character, and I learned this right away, you create a character, write it down on something, and write down what that character is and about what chapter you're in, because you're going to forget all these names. And if you're a lot smarter than me, you probably won't. But it's nice to be able to refer back. Okay, I'm trying to find William Forrester, and he's one of the characters. But you want to, like he just said, Baker. I'd forgotten the name.
Right.
But you want to do that if you decide to do this. I've heard over the years everybody's got a book in them. I think maybe that's true, but probably most people don't ever just sit down and get started and continue it on. I am in the process of, my father was literally a sharecropper when he was a kid. And he wrote a book called Memories and Reflections of a Florida Cracker. And, Florida crackers were the whip guys that had the in Payne's Prairie and all that. I mean, they literally were around when he was a youngster still, and because if you could get the cow and brand them, it's yours, because they were running wild and stuff. Anyway, he wrote, and I'm going to digress just because I'm proud of him. My father, no Boyer had ever graduated from high school before Dad. I'm fairly certain of that. And he was in World War II, and my mother badgered him when they came out with something called the GI Bill to go to college, and he did. And anyway, he was number one in his class in University of Florida, and he was number one in his class at University of Florida Law School. My wife, who I adore after 25 years, was number one in her class in economics at Georgetown, and she's from South Dakota, just another little old place, and number one in her class at University of Florida Law School. and they both took me on. I mean, I didn't do miserably, but I wasn't number one either time. That's a history I probably ought not to go into my college history. I'll just shorten it. If I hadn't gone on active duty in the Army, I don't know, maybe I'd have been a pretty good car salesman or something, because I was fouling up, and the Army kind of set me straight. So I've given you a lot more history than you need, but that's the reason I did it. Dad wrote that book, and it's one story after another story after another story. And what he would do, something come up in mind, he would dictate on a tape, and then he put the tape in a red well. And his last secretary found this red well full of tapes, and he told her, and she said, "You mind if I type it up?" So she did, and he ended up with that book, which is kind of neat. It's good for the family, and I'm telling you, you might want to do that for the family. I am in the process of doing the same thing, but Dad's book is really, you learn a lot about Florida history and and how much has happened in America as well. I mean, Florida was rural when I was a youngster, and we had relatives all over the state, and we go and visit our relatives, and nobody ever thought about staying in a motel or hotel. We slept on pallets, which was quilts put on the floor, and but it was rural, and all my relatives were rural. So anyway, Dad's book was neat for that. I'm doing it. Mine is not going to be nearly so neat, but I'm doing it just so my family and my couple of generations, I probably won't print but maybe 50 or so of them, but I'd like them to be able to have that. And I started a sequel. But it's funny. I'm kind of making some progress on that, and we put our house on the market, and all of a sudden, and I'm retired, and all of a sudden I've got more jobs than I have from my wife for us to put the house on the market. Then we just took the house off of the market because our son wants to get married in the backyard. So that's what's going to happen. But I hope if I live long enough, I'll finish the sequel. It has not every character is in it and stuff like that, but it's kind of fun. I've had the nice fortune of going to do some book clubs, and some people have read my book and have some, and I can talk about it. But if anybody wants to buy this, I don't want to ruin the plot. My sister who read this, she said it was an autobiography, but I don't know.
I was going to ask how much of it was autographical and how much of it was, autobiographical.
Well, if it's autobiographical, it's got some screws loose, huh? Well, you write on what you know, and I think I know the courtroom, and I think I know. I'm not so sure I know romance as well as it's written in here.
Let's hope not.
But in any event, that's it's been a fun thing to do. My daughter did the cover for me, and I think it's kind of a provocative cover. Why don't you pass it around so people can see? And if you look on the back, you'll see that there's a Cape Buffalo. And if you look in the back cover at the corner is the Duval County,
It sure is.
Duval County Courthouse. And
The old one or the new one?
the new one.
The new one.
Yeah, which is the most beautiful courthouse in the United States, I think. Certainly it was. And so anyway, that is.
Well, the significance of the.
The significance is
will
part
it be
of
in
the
there?
story.
Okay, because I haven't gotten to that part yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, that's. I don't know. Does anybody have any questions about it, or yeah?
So the technique I read, Hemingway said his method was to write drunk and edit sober. But what he meant was put everything down, and then later on in calm reflection take out what doesn't need to be there. So how did you find yourself editing?
I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's really interesting, because I really didn't know how I was going to go on this. And I was recently, on our 25th wedding anniversary, we were down in Key West, and you saw where Hemingway house, where he apparently wrote 5 or 6 hours a day. This is what I'm about to say is true. I would write not really knowing where I was going to, chapter by chapter. And while I was in the process of writing, it would kind of come around, and then I would go back and edit and expand, or edit and make it less. You're talking about 75,000. I think this has about 100,000 words in it. And
So you truly didn't know the end of the story until you got there?
no, I kind of figured out what I was going to do at the end, way into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really didn't know where it was going to go. I'm telling you, I mean, I knew generally. I understand hunting, and I understand the practice of law, and I understand what litigation is and how it happens. But that is. But for me, so I'm no Hemingway.
It's just a method.
No, I know. Yeah. You know, I've read a lot of Hemingway stuff, and I think he was drunk when he wrote a lot of it.
He said he was.
Yeah. You know, I remember reading The Old Man and the Sea, and I read it when I was in high school, and I thought, this just doesn't make much sense. Then I listened to it on a book on tape, and it finally made sense. I mean, you know, because he's just rambling to himself. The best thing Hemingway ever wrote, by the way, if you want to take a note, is the Short and Happy Life of Francis Macomber, and it's a short story. And but that's if you read, you'll know after hearing me talk why I would like it. I have been a book collector for years, and I like to read, but I collected, you know, my genre was old Florida, you know, those books that were written when Jacksonville was, you know, one of the big stopping off points for the United States going south, and one of those books I'll never forget, they took a steamboat ride from Naples to Fort Lauderdale. Can you imagine that? And but it was written. So anyway, that was the genre I got. I have all the Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings stuff and things like that. I also liked the adventure books and the hunting and fishing books, mostly from before the 1950s. Some stuff after that, but like and everything I collected was first editions. Oh, I say everything, mostly first edition, first printing. And I've got 3 copies of Out of Africa because I got a good deal, and I enjoyed doing that. My wife and I, we'd be going to a new town, and we'd go to a bookstore, and we knew what we were looking for. We knew what the prices were, and so it was like a treasure hunt. And but that ended with the computers. I went in through all of that because next month I'm going to go to St. Petersburg, and I've got a booth, and I'm going to sell a lot of my books. And you know, I've got some genre. I've got Hemingway's book, obviously, because he was like hunting and stuff like that. So this is going to be another adventure. I don't know if I'll sell a book while I'm sitting there. I've got books that I paid $10 for that are worth 50 or 60, and most of my new books are worth a lot less than what I paid for them. I have an original Gone with the Wind, which I was looking up yesterday trying to price it. When Oprah Winfrey paid $5,000, I thought that was crazy, and now they're worth, $8,000, $10,000. So I haven't got a slice idea if somebody's going to buy my original first printing of that. And anyway, I've got a lot of Salou. If y'all ever heard of Salou in Africa, they named a big part of park after Salou and stuff, and I've got his with some writings and stuff. Anyway, it's going to be a fun adventure. It's another adventure. I also, a buddy of mine and I have been hiking the Appalachian Trail for the last couple of years. and we just hike it by section. So what we do is, and I think maybe the Appalachian Trail will come into the next book because it's another adventure. But you know, we're old. You know, I'm 74, and we go and we'll hike 8 or 10 miles a day, and we'll have somebody drop us off. You can pay these people to do that, and then we get off the trail and we go to a motel and we have a couple of cocktails. And then we have a nice dinner, and then we sleep late, and we go and do it again the next day. And we were having kind of fun doing that. We don't have any idea that we're going to finish it. I mean, that's just not going to happen at our age. But I hiked something called Mount Katahdin, which is the beginning and the end of the trail. I did that last year with my son-in-law. It was the toughest, not the most dangerous, but the toughest mountain hike I ever made. And took over 15 hours to hike 6 miles. But as we were hiking, people would be passing, and we'd talk to them as you do. And because I was kind of slow, we got to the top, and all these people who are younger, they're clapping for me because I'm so that might end up in a book. I think that would be a neat scene to put into it. Anyway, don't know how I'll figure to put that in. Maybe a 74-year-old found romance at the top of Mount Katahdin. I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but I'm happy to answer any type of question anybody has.
I have a few. Have you read A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson?
Yes.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
So good.
Y'all familiar with that? He's hiking the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah.
And they made a movie out of it with I haven't seen the movie. Robert Redford and somebody. Anyway, he didn't finish the hike, but it's a wonderful, funny book. Yeah, I read that.
You just gave away the end.
Well,
It's okay, the journey is.
Oh, it's about the journey? Okay. So I know you said there's different copyright dates, but from starting the book to, writing the last sentence, so maybe not with the editing completely, how long did that take?
when I first had it, sent it into the, what is it? Y'all know it.
Library of Congress?
Library of Congress. When I first mailed it to them, I'd probably worked on it 3 or 4 years, and then I worked on it for a year and a half after I left the bench. I left the bench, and I'm thinking about becoming a senior judge, but I'm actually doing a little bit of legal work for people, and it adds to the income a little bit. Mostly I do it for free, though. That's kind of dumb, but it's fine. So.
Oh, and then with writing the character, you said you were kind of writing as you went. Did you jump around? Did you write some in the middle at the end, or
not
was it
on
pretty
purpose?
much...
But sometimes I wrote, and then I thought this needs to be split up, and otherwise it's not going to be nearly as cool. I mean, no, seriously, I thought that's a good question, by the way, but not on purpose.
Okay.
When you started writing it, how did you start? Did you just start writing thoughts down, or just...
The first paragraph in this book was the first paragraph I wrote, and it's a little racy, but that was the first paragraph, and I had a case that kind of was an inspiration on some of the subject matter. I probably had multiple cases that were inspirations on different types of things in the book. Yeah.
So which brings us to last month's discussion about lawyers writing about their profession and cases and so forth. And obviously we know a lot of interesting things.
Yeah.
People tell us things that we're supposed to keep quiet and not use, and so the situations you can use, but not anything that is attributable back to a particular individual unless they've given you. So you have to separate that in your mind. Okay, I know this, but how do I know this? Is it because everybody knows it and it's a fact because I know it's a fact, now I can use it? Or is it just a great story that if it wasn't my client, would be great to write down? How do you separate that?
Well, no, I can appreciate, and I was conscious about not making it obvious or about, and I can assure you there's no character in this book that would be my client.
Right.
I mean, there, in a broader sense, it was what I experienced and handled at
Right.
different times. But that's it. Yeah,
So
I
it's
was very
plausible.
conscious of exactly
It's
what
plausible, it's not factual.
Correct.
You know?
Yeah, no, that's right.
Well, I worked in Memphis for a while, I met John Grisham, and I know what the firm was based on, and the characters in several of his books were in my law firm and so forth.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they knew they were the characters and so forth,
Oh.
so they knew the cases, and, you know, you have to be very careful about how I put that out. I mean, I asked Grisham after a second, but are they all gonna end up in the Caymans for $10 million? I mean, you have anything in mind? And so he said he was working on it.
Yeah, you know, I guess I've read almost everything he's written, and I think he's just a real enjoyable writer. But the best one I ever was Christmas with whoever it was, where they had the snowman on top of the roof. And I don't think there's anything legal about that one, but with the Cranks, Christmas with the Cranks. Yeah.
Well, here we are at 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and. But I just want to thank you very much. This